It's official. I have an AuDHD diagnosis. So recently I've been diagnosed with both ADHD and autism, ASD. Please let me know if you want me to speak a little bit more about that process and my personal experience with getting this diagnosis. But for now, I'm really just processing in real time. It's quite fresh. I learned about my ASD yesterday, and I was diagnosed with ADHD about 3 weeks ago now. So, first of all, I suppose I should start by saying it's not a surprise to me. Um, the dual diagnosis is probably a little bit more surprising. However, throughout my life, I've always had some challenges and felt like I was different from childhood onwards. A lot of that I consider to be the result of traumatic childhood experiences. You know, I've always been sensitive. I've always been, as my family used to refer to me, a flower child, a bit whimsical, and I think that over the years, trauma definitely had its part to play in the change in my personality. But as I've grown and I've healed and I've found myself still having the same challenges that I've always had in terms of relationships, friendships, which was basically just me never feeling quite aligned with people, always feeling like relationships were surface level or shallow, struggling with the mundane, day to day small talk, wanting deeper connections, being the friend who was the go to therapist, the go to when you needed to speak about something a little bit more on a deeper level. And that was hardly ever reciprocated within my friendships. And that was one of the things that I found quite a challenge. Um, you know, and it's so funny because it all makes so much sense. And do I think, yesterday when I first found out, it was a bit of a mix of emotions. It was quite raw. I did cry. And I think that was just a cry of release. I think that was just a cry of finally feeling like maybe I understood myself a little bit better, or at least my challenges, but also feeling like, who am I? Who am I actually? You know, am I masking? Have I always been masking? What what does the real me actually look like, actually feel like, actually sound like? Who is she? And I had a moment where I felt slightly destabilized because I thought that this meant that my personality isn't my personality. Now, whilst I think there is an element of masking constantly, as well as being a Black woman, code switching that goes on day in, day out, specifically when you're working within corporate settings, you may not always feel that you can express in the way that you might express at home. Um, but I think it's that and it's deeper than that. And for me, I suppose one of the things I'm sure I suppress is my whimsy, if you will. My desire for aesthetic things, fun things, colorful things, sparkly things, and just that, I suppose, what some might consider hyper feminine um, aesthetic traits and things of that nature, as well as just, my desire for slow living. I don't really connect with this idea of, you know, I have to be a career woman and I've got to be in the workplace and it's good for me and my children will be fine. Like, and that is not really about traditional. Sometimes I feel like it's that I want a more traditional life, but other times I think it's just that I don't want to be in the rat race. I don't value the competition within these spaces. I don't value the shallowness. I don't value the stepping over others to get to where you want to be. And I think that is a big part of why I struggle with work environments and the hierarchy within work environments, because I understand context and systems and nuance and race and power structures and how that impacts so many of us as individuals, that it just never feels like those spaces are a level playing field or a space where you can truly be your authentic self and still thrive. Now, don't get me wrong, I feel closer to my authentic self than I've ever felt. I don't think I have ever felt quite as liberated and unmasked in terms of the fact that I just do what is right for me. I'm not trying to please people or seek the validation of others like I used to do. I'm just very much who I am. And I'm not afraid to advocate for myself or for others and to express, when I'm not feeling comfortable with something. Now, of course, that is still a work in progress, and there's certain things I may express more easily than others. But in general, I feel that I'm much more outspoken than I've ever been in my life. And I think that part of that is becoming a qualified professional, being in essentially what you may consider to be a leadership position where you are, you have ethical responsibility, where you have people who look up to you, who are looking to you to do the right thing and to make the right choices. And so for me, that is definitely a big driver. But I also think that even when I consider my childhood and my tumultuous upbringing and, the multiple different levels and factors of abuse, I know that I've always been that child who would advocate, who would question, who would wonder, why is this the way that it is? And I was always told that I was overly sensitive, that I was reading too much into things, that I was too much in general. And, I really carried that with me. And for a time, it led to, me not really truly trusting in my own voice and my own reasoning and in who I am. So I suppose I cried because when I received my diagnosis, which was only yesterday, um, the ASD, I felt like, does this mean that I am sensitive? I am overly sensitive. I am a social justice warrior. And it really is just because I have this diagnosis and because I'm neurodivergent. Does it mean that I was wrong about the friendships I ended and the things that I stepped away from because I'm overly sensitive and neurodivergent? And I had a moment where I really queried and questioned kind of, I suppose, my whole existence up to now. And I thought about my mother and her context and how I'm nearly 100% certain that she is also a neurodivergent woman. And, that made me grieve my childhood a little bit and the situation that we wound up in terms of the family that my mother connected herself to, and just considering her as even more vulnerable than perhaps even I am, which is something that I've, grappled with over the years. But I suppose my official diagnosis has kind of made me go, okay, so yeah, there is some truth in that. So there's a lot of different things, I suppose, that personally for me came up when I was exploring this process, but also upon receiving an actual diagnosis. ADHD and autism, they seem to almost contradict each other in terms of the literature and what you read and the research and the videos and all of the different countless things that I've been looking at. But when you bring those together, it almost kind of doesn't make much sense. But I'm starting to understand it as well as really see those traits in myself. I can see how if I hadn't gone through this right to choose process and requested to be assessed for both ASD and ADHD, because I wanted to be assessed by someone who was trauma informed as well, because again, I didn't want to receive a misdiagnosis or be on any medication that I don't need to be on. And I wanted them to have that understanding of the overlap with trauma. So for me, that was a really important process in terms of who I went through. And I went through Psychiatry UK, and I did consider that it might be quite medical model based, quite symptom based, rather than a holistic approach, which is what I prefer, within my own professional background. However, I really wanted to be able to feel at the end of this process without a shadow of a doubt that I had been assessed by people who, one, had the expertise, the experience, um, and essentially would look at it from that level. Um, and to be honest with you, I was quite lucky and fortunate that actually the psychiatrist I dealt with, the second specifically, because I had two different psychiatrists for each diagnosis because of their, again, specialty, their training, their expertise within the subjects. And I can make another video about that whole process and how I felt about that and the fact that it was two different, psychiatrists, which was not something that I expected at the beginning. I can make a video about that if you would like me to. Please comment to let me know if you would find that interesting to hear about the actual journey and using, that the specific company that I went with to gain my diagnosis. But I guess for me, they did have a holistic approach. The assessment was quite comprehensive, especially the ASD assessment. And it's so interesting because, as I say, I didn't really realize that it would just be the ADHD assessment first. I didn't know they were going to be done together. I didn't know how that process worked until I was kind of in it. So it was definitely learning as I went along. But yes, my ASD assessment was specifically comprehensive, and that was actually the diagnosis that I suspected more. So I was a little bit surprised and shocked with ADHD, but just because I hadn't really considered it. I for sure have executive functioning challenges, but I'm also very focused when I need to be, and I can get on with my work and I can thrive in a professional environment, things like that. So I was a little bit, I did well within my academic studies, receiving, a first at the end of my degree, things like that. And I think that it was just never something I think I had taken on other people's projections onto me in terms of how capable I am and how high achieving I am and how all of these things and oh, you're so intellectual and all of these different things. But I didn't consider my own lens, what I know of myself, and that actually all of that is also a part of masking and, this perfectionism and wanting to not fail or, feeling like you need to do the absolute best or like you have to prove something. And I suppose I never, for me, if I was proving anything, it was just that, with everything that I had been through. And in spite of that, I was able to achieve what I achieved. And that for me was just proving that to myself. Um, but that meant that, you know, I really did throw myself into my studies, and sometimes that felt like it took precedence over everything. It was not something that I felt was natural or easy in terms of being able to keep up with my home life, my mothering, my being a wife, and housework, all of those different things alongside my studies. For me, there was some sacrifice involved, and that's exactly the same dynamic and context now that I'm working, and specifically working within academia, which is incredibly cognitively, heavy loading and constant, and you are constantly switched on, and of course you are navigating lots of different individuals and people and communications all the time. So, between those things, but also my children, these are the reasons why I decided to go ahead with the assessments, because I just wanted to understand myself a little bit more. And I think in the context of being a mother, things have definitely changed. So, yeah. Hi. Speaking of being a mother, my little one she just came in and wanted to get into the video, and I'm not quite sure that I'm ever going to show them on camera. That's just something that I'm not sure if I will do. But yes, I suppose it's time for me to go and do this thing called life. I'm working today, but I'm working from home. And again, even in the context of AuDHD, I find it so much more supportive to be able to work from home when I don't need to be on site, and to just be able to work in my office and just kind of get on with the things that I need to do with little interaction. So yes, I am a working mom. Um, I am married. I have two small children, and I also have AuDHD. So it's a lot to process. And I'm sure I will be coming back to you with a few more reflections and insights as I kind of process all of this in real time and what it means for me. But yeah, thank you for tuning in. And I hope if you liked it, please subscribe and comment. Again, let me know if any of this resonates and what your personal experience has been. I'm hoping to build community here and be around more like-minded individuals, as that's definitely something I've struggled with throughout my life. And as I start to realize the why behind that, maybe it's just that I haven't quite found my tribe yet. And maybe it's that I need a tribe of individuals who kind of see life in this similar way as I do, because of course, ADHD, ADHD, ASD, we're all different. We all have different brains and minds. Um, it's not linear. So I understand that, there's no generalizing in terms of personalities. And I know that from lived experience in terms of the people that are around me who I know who have diagnosis. It does not mean that we will naturally gel and blend, but I am trying to build connections and tribes with people. So please do comment, like, subscribe, and follow us if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about my journey. Thank you. Bye.